roll call.
Here.
Here. Okay, the next item on our agenda is a land acknowledgement. We, the Moorhead Human Rights Commission, collectively and with gratitude acknowledge the sacred land of the city of Moorhead is built upon. We acknowledge the people who have resided here for generations and recognize that the spirit of the Dakota, Ojibwe, and Métis and all indigenous communities permeates this land. The contribution of the indigenous people shall not be forgotten, nor will the success that is achieved by the people of the land. We will continue to educate, advocate, honor, and unite for indigenous people of this land. We're not doing the agenda, so we will just move right to guest speakers. Yay!
You.
Well, can you hear through this?
Yeah.
Awesome, fantastic. Also, what do I need to do here? Anything? Awesome. Okay, and then how do we get it on PowerPoint? Too much electronics for me. I'm too old to learn this. Honestly, like I cannot learn anything new. Well, while we're waiting for that to come up, I'll introduce myself and allow Sarah to introduce herself as well. My name is Annie Lafreniere Ritchie, and I am the Safe Harbor Regional Navigator out of Someplace Safe, and I serve 16 counties in west central Minnesota, which includes Clay County, and I've been doing anti-trafficking work for the past 6 years. Go ahead.
I am Sarah Stompro, and I work at Rape and Abuse Crisis Center as the advocacy supervisor, and so we have identified advocates at our agency that provide Safe Harbor supportive services and direct advocacy who are experiencing sexual exploitation or sex trafficking.
Awesome. Well, it looks like the PowerPoint may not work, which is A-okay. Sarah and I have been doing this work long enough and have been presenting alongside each other long enough to do it without some background. So I'll just talk a little bit about Minnesota's response to trafficking. And I think it's really wonderful that we're here now because January is also Human Trafficking Awareness Month. So what we have, oh, there we go, perfect. So what we have in Minnesota is we have something called the Safe Harbor Law. And Safe Harbor is actually also who funds our position. Okay, cool, this is fancy. Thank you. Just bear with me again. I'm like, oh, this is old. I work for a nonprofit. Yeah. Okay, so first of all, what is human trafficking? So what we see is human trafficking. We see both sex trafficking and labor trafficking. And essentially what it is when one person obtains or holds another person in compelled service. So as I had shared before, Minnesota has specific funding set aside for human trafficking related services. That funding pays for my position, and it also pays for Sarah's position, and then another advocate with Rape and Abuse Crisis Center. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But essentially what we do is we serve folks who are experiencing various forms of trafficking. And what we see for labor trafficking oftentimes is folks who may be providing domestic work, working in sweatshops or factories, agricultural work. They may be doing sales crews or peddling. They may be in the hospitality industry. So in certain areas in our state, we see folks who are experiencing labor trafficking, perhaps working in hotel industry, sometimes in restaurant and food service, and then also folks who are providing labor services. In terms of sex trafficking, we see many different forms of sex trafficking as well. One thing I think that is very common for our region and really across West Central Minnesota is folks who are engaging in survival sex, so essentially trading sex for something that they need in order to survive. We also see what has traditionally been referred to as prostitution, so maybe folks who are engaged in that online or in the street. We also see it happening in hotels, obviously, motels, bars and clubs, sometimes in stripping industries, and then also in pornography. We do see a lot of child solicitation, and then sometimes there are incidences of mail order brides. Is there anything you want to add to that?
I don't have anything to add. You covered it all beautifully.
Awesome, perfect. Yeah. Okay, cool. So another really big thing that, just because we're Safe Harbor funded, that is important to talk about really is the commercial exploitation of children and youth. And that's something that was set forth with the Minnesota Safe Harbor Law. So essentially they recognized, they as in many folks, law enforcement, service providers, legislators, et cetera, recognized that in our state, up until I believe 2014, we were actually criminalizing youth who were experiencing exploitation and trafficking. And so then the state was like, oh, maybe we should kind of look at this and we should dig a little bit deeper into what's happening and maybe we should respond in a different way. So essentially what the state did was came up with an identification of what commercial exploitation is, and then of course set aside funding for services. So what we identify as commercial exploitation in Minnesota is somebody who is exchanging anything of value, and that can be money, it can be a place to stay, it can be drugs, it can be cell phones. I have worked with youth who were exploited for like an iPad, can be, again, substances, drugs, or alcohol. It can be transportation, so maybe a ride home after work or a ride somewhere else that they need to go, or status in a gang, or something else that we're seeing a lot more often with our youth is it can be even just status in a relationship. So essentially this idea that somebody is being, it's not an idea, somebody is being commercially exploited if, for example, they're in an intimate partner relationship, their partner is asking for nude photos or nude videos, they're deciding they don't really want to do that, and then the partner says, you know, if you don't send me those videos, I'm going to do this. So there's some sort of threat or coercion involved with this, and we honestly, so as I said, I'm in 16 counties in Minnesota. We see this in literally every single school in every one of our counties. And Sarah, again, as a local, can talk a little bit more about what that might look like here, but really this idea that our youth are exchanging in sex acts or videos or photos in exchange for something else.
Yeah, I would say that's something we see very regularly, even as young as our early middle schoolers, is a lot of online and social media exploitation. And that can be with folks that they are friends with personally at school, and it also is folks that they're meeting online. And then they are using different forms of extortion to
Perfect. So here's just a nice little map of what the Safe Harbor network of services looks like. As I mentioned, I serve West Central Minnesota, which includes Clay County. The really cool thing about Minnesota is that we have this Safe Harbor network, and so we're really well connected with Safe Harbor providers from across the state, not just regional navigators, but we have housing programs, we have supportive services, we have legal services, I mean, all kinds of different things that are available to folks. And again, as you see this map, it kind of just lays out where the different regions are. So if, for example, Sarah were to meet with somebody tomorrow who has family in Rochester, and says, you know, I don't feel safe living in Moorhead anymore, I'd like to connect with my family in Rochester, and I would like to receive additional support. We could easily connect them with Safe Harbor services there and ensure that they're continuing to receive victim support and ongoing resources wherever they reside in the state of Minnesota, which I think is pretty cool. So, and then another thing, do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, I'll talk about this a little bit. So this is the Minnesota Student Survey that they did in 2019. So they spearheaded a new question in 2019, which we loved to see, and that was, have you ever traded sex or sexual activity to receive money, food, drugs, alcohol, place to stay, or anything else? So again, kind of cluing into that survival sex piece. And they had 1.4% answer yes, and that is just of the kids who were in school that day who didn't, have any shame, fear, guilt, and answered honestly. So we do anticipate that number to probably be higher than what we're seeing. But just initially for those 9th and 11th graders, it was a 1.4% yes. And I think you have then like how that breaks down across the state, which
I'm
is
just
really cool.
curious though, how many of you have heard of the Minnesota Student Survey, first of all? You guys are like, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's very, very, very beneficial, I think, just to understand kind of things that are happening. Okay, so then for those of you who haven't heard of it, you got a really good spiel. It's been really helpful for us in identifying kind of the different things that are happening with youth across the state who are also experiencing sexual exploitation. So something that Sarah didn't share was that really the start of the student survey was to get a better idea of the health and well-being of all public school students across the state. So they asked questions about school activities, whether students are engaged in sports, whether they have enough food to eat at home, substance use, all kinds, like really anything across the spectrum of health and well-being, suicidal behaviors, all of that. So what we were able to kind of get out of that, as Sarah had shared, is a really good breakdown of what sexual exploitation looks like across the state, and then also different things that are happening in the lives of youth who are experiencing sexual exploitation. So the biggest surprise for us as service providers was that I think everyone has this idea that folks experiencing exploitation and trafficking is probably most commonly occurring in Twin Cities metro area. And we actually found with our student survey that that's the opposite of what's happening. We saw the lowest rates of sexual exploitation in the East and West metro areas, and we saw the highest rates of self-disclosed sexual exploitation really in our rural communities. So kind of interesting, we do see here, and this is 2019 data, but we do see that West Central Minnesota is experiencing about the same rates as other parts of the state. I will say that both Sarah and I have provided services to youth, and specifically both Fargo and Moorhead experiencing exploitation and trafficking, and it is happening on, I would say, a pretty high level here. So those 1.3 students, it might be higher here. I'm thinking, again, students who were probably not attending school that day or not answering honestly. Another thing is that the preliminary data from 2022 on this question is we're seeing about twice the rates of sexual exploitation for all youth, and then certain pockets of youth, youth of color, youth who identify as trans or gender diverse have even more elevated rates of trafficking and exploitation happening in their lives. So we know that the impact of the pandemic really on our youth has increased rates of exploitation, in addition to many other issues.
Add is on this one, which is that we see the rates for boys being like equal lateral to what we're seeing for
Yes.
girls, and so kind of breaking down that myth that this only really happens to girls or cisgender girls, that we're also seeing boys reporting the same level.
And unfortunately, we don't have it here, but we do know that in the services that are provided to youth across the state through Safe Harbor, at least, is that about 7% of those accessing services identify as boys. So we know that we're not reaching or providing services to the vast majority of youth who are experiencing exploitation, and really just a tiny, tiny, tiny portion of boys. So this is just another breakdown by gender identity and by race and ethnicity. So I, as an Indigenous woman, talk a lot about the different risk factors that Indigenous people experience. We know that in terms of the student survey, again, it's reporting about double rates of exploitation. We also know for adults experiencing trafficking, at least in Minnesota, about 1 in 4 folks who are accessing services for trafficking are Native, when we actually only represent 1% of the population. So like that's what, 25% increase in rates of trafficking for our Native folks. So it's pretty unfortunate, and we also do know that happens here in Moorhead as well. So
Tanya, want to say something?
oh, I'm so sorry. Much louder now. Okay, cool. Okay, I'll let you talk about Clay County.
Yeah, so Clay County has a protocol response team that includes law enforcement, our supportive services, so RACC providing that safe harbor advocacy services, ANIA regional navigator. We have victim advocates from the state's attorneys. We have our medical providers at our local ERs and our care clinic, which is our child abuse resource center. And so we have SANE nurses. So we have a really large group of folks who attend our Clay County response protocol meetings, and so that we continue to have a coordinated response when youth or adults who are experiencing exploitation or trafficking are identified in our community, that we're getting them connected to the appropriate services and ensuring that they have access to those services. So that is by providing ongoing education and support, updating those protocols to ensure that we have the correct people on them, providing education to not only the individuals, but also service provider stakeholders. We are in the schools, we're in the juvenile center, the jail, so just about everywhere that we can be not only training staff, but also providing education and prevention services to students as well. So like a really big rundown of what we try to do
Huge overview.
in our community to ensure that, one, that we know how to identify trafficking and exploitation, and then also connect them to the right people.
Add to that, so something that I did when I first started this role was I met individually alongside someone from RACC with all of the different members of our team, so our dedicated law enforcement investigator, our county attorney, our county victim service providers, child protection, really everyone who was involved in the team, and talked about their particular buy-in, and it was really just fantastic to hear how everyone is so dedicated really to providing better responses, to providing prevention of trafficking and exploitation. And then also a big thing I think that Clay County does that other portions of the state are not as great at is that we really recognize that it's not just sexual exploitation or trafficking of youth that's a concern, but we really are dedicated to responding to adults as well. And the whole team is on board with that, which I think is fantastic. And then also recognizing that labor trafficking is something that is impacting our community members too. So it's just cool to be a part of a community. Sorry, I'm like nerding out because this is my job and I love it. But it's cool to be part of a community where people in various different roles and systems all care equally and are dedicated to really ending this harm against all of our community members. So that's it on our part. Do you guys have any questions?
I just want to thank both of you for being here on short notice, Anne and Sarah, and thank you for all you do in the community. What other, if you had a wish list of what other things the community could do, or a county or a state, to help with preventative measures, what would that be?
I bet we'll have different answers. So in terms of prevention, I think the more education we can provide, the better. Another thing that we saw specifically in our part of the state is that youth, at least who are experiencing exploitation, expressed that they were lacking some pretty significant things in their life. So having caring and supportive adults in their life. Also, unfortunately, a huge portion of our kids who are experiencing sexual exploitation also reported that they don't have enough food to eat at home on a regular basis. So like you can't say for sure that that's what's leading to sexual exploitation. Are they exchanging sex for something to eat? But we definitely know that it's extremely elevated rates. So like how can we increase food access for our youth who need it? I mean, housing and shelter are always issues. Go ahead. Other thoughts?
You know, I think one, as Annie touched on, is there's a lot of really passionate people who are part of the response team. And so I think a lot of it is just getting enough momentum to be in the places where we can access. So we've done a lot of work in the last year or so to get into our middle schools. We're still working to get into our high school. There's a really good educational curriculum for anti-trafficking for youth called Not a Number that we really want to bring more to our middle schools and high school students to be able to give that education to them, hopefully preventatively, but also then if there are disclosures that we can connect them. And so it's just kind of getting into those when they're already so busy and they have so much going on. So it just takes time and effort, but we are in our middle schools and our alternative learning centers here locally in Moorhead, which is a really great start. But I think as Annie said, just addressing those basic needs, we don't have for youth specifically like a safe place for them to go if home isn't safe. You know, we just have our juvenile detention center, and so that is a gap we see in our community, is not having somewhere else safe for them to go to.
So when you say you're in the schools, like what does that mean? I mean, do you go in and speak to them? Do you have, you know, like my kids just went through DARE. I mean, do you guys, is that, how do you reach them?
A great question. So at Rape and Abuse Crisis Center, we do have an entire prevention education team that provides a variety of different curriculum. So they have like healthy relationship groups where they'll go into like certain classrooms or certain grades and provide that yearly. We have just kind of gotten back in after the pandemic and the schools being closed and going virtual, kind of getting back into that system has taken us a little bit of time. So they may be getting it once they get into middle schools or high schools, getting some of that just general education. But the Not a Number group is something that we are also bringing, and that's not classroom wide yet. That's specific to like identified youth via their counselors or referrals from other community members.
Anybody else? I was just like in my head, I'm like, could you make it like part of a, like the gym? I mean, gym, don't they have like a health class or something? Can they
That's our
add
hope.
that into their?
It is included with national standards, so as part of something that can be included in health classes, and there are different schools across the United States that do implement them in regular school settings. It just depends on, I think one of the biggest things is that I think that teachers and administration are a little concerned about like, what is this really going to do in our schools and how will students respond to it, because it doesn't always sound as exciting or as fun as it actually is. So when you say, oh, well, we have this great prevention education curriculum, they're like, oh, okay, cool. But really just seeing the benefit of it and the different conversations that youth engage in, I think is super helpful too for administration. So that's something that we do kind of on a statewide level, is that we provide that information on what it looks like to school admin, to behavioral health professionals, et cetera, to try to bring it in. We've also, on the statewide level, really tried to push to have it be mandatory, so passing it through legislature. It hasn't happened yet, but that is a hope.
And the other thing that we want to do before we bring those curriculums into the schools, really make sure staff feel comfortable. Because again, like if you see an increase in disclosures, we want to make sure that they feel competent and comfortable responding to those. So it's also getting all the staff appropriately trained in preparation.
Well, a lot of those, I mean, I would think that majority of the kids that are having these issues or having these problems probably aren't, I mean, are they even going to school? Are they going to say anything? I mean, I would think that you'd want to educate the kids on what, like, what to look for in your peers would be important so they could all be safe places for them.
Agree. That's one of the big things too, is helping you develop empathy and how to interact with each other. But the really truly the online exploitation is just so huge that it really is happening every day.
Every day.
With students in our community.
Anybody else?
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you
for
so
having
much
us.
for joining us.
We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Citizens to be heard? None? Good. Okay. Law enforcement update. What do you got?
Stuff that I have you've already heard before.
Okay.
Avenues Okay. It's not working at all? Now it's working. Okay. So then also in December, in December, we did the Shop with a Cop, where we had referrals from teachers and counselors, social workers, for individuals, kids that were in need of some additional gifts. And we were able to work with Target and help provide that and go out and do some shopping with them for the children and for their family as well. Between the two programs, we were able to reach out to about 100 youth in the community. So it was a pretty successful program, we thought.
So when you guys do that, do the officers pay for these gifts, or do you guys have a fund that you
Yes.
to purchase stuff, or what?
Both. So when we're
Okay.
doing the giving tree, that's all the officers are just volunteering their time, and they go out and they purchase the gifts on their own. When we do Shop with the Cop, we work with PAL, the Police Activities League, and with Target Foundation, and we have funds provided through the foundation and through PAL for it. So it's some of both.
Good.
And then my last update is that as of next week, that'll be my last week with the Moorhead Police Department. I am accepting a position with the Clay County Sheriff's Office to be a chief deputy with them. So I will be leaving as a liaison for human rights. However, you're going to be in good hands. My mentor is going to be taking over my position. So Captain Derek Swenson will be the liaison for human rights moving forward for the police department. But rest assured, you are in good hands.
All right, we'll take your word for it. Well, we enjoyed having you here and certainly appreciate you coming in and updating us on all the stuff and being part of our group.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I
Yeah.
started in 2019 attending meetings, so just short of 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And I appreciate the trust that the commission has given me and the fact that several of the commissioners have brought people in and I've helped kind of work through some of the situations that they were having either with the police department or just some of the situations they were having within the community, and I was able to talk to them and the commissioners and hopefully come to a resolution with that.
Good. Well, we'll miss you, but we're glad you're not leaving
Oh, I won't be far.
and we're looking forward to working with you. We'll be nice.
Thank you.
Maybe. So you're going to be at our next meeting then? Okay.
So I'll be attending the regular meetings. And I'll just also say on behalf of our department, we've appreciated having Chris here. You haven't seen a lot of us here besides Chris because of the trust we put in Chris's message and the time and patience that he has with us to sometimes explain the needs of our community and those members. So we really do appreciate Chris's work throughout the last few years being here. And it's a big loss for us also.
Yeah, it is. It is. Well, thank you so much. All right. Do we have anything? I mean, we can't really do too much of anything else, so I guess we are adjourned until next month. All right. Thank you. Hopefully, we'll have a full team next